friends. In Indian economy, today we have to start Unit 3, wherein we will be talking about the public sector, the private sector, the cooperative sector, and the small scale sector in India. Right? So we will be discussing about these sectors, and then we will be talking about why they are important to the Indian economy, and we will also be talking about the various problems and the challenges that these different sectors in the economy face. Fine. So let us start our discussion with the public sector. Now, what do we mean by public sector? You have heard of this word very often. You talk about public sector banks, public sector units, PSUs and PSBs. You talk about public sector organizations. So what do we mean by public sector? Let us understand that part of the economy which is controlled by the state. Those business enterprises which are controlled by the state. What do we mean by the state? State does not mean Rajya, as in Uttarakhand state. State means a particular country, Rashtra. Fine. So here state means a particular country. So part of economy which is controlled by the country. Basically the ownership is in the name of the people of the country. But all the people in India cannot exercise the ownership. Can 130 crore people gather together and decide what is to be done with the public sector organization, what not to be done? They cannot. So what happens is, on their behalf, their representatives control these public sector units. Who are the representatives? The MPs, the MLAs in some cases, and the government which is formed at the center and at the states. So they are the ones who, on behalf of the general public, control such enterprises. Right? These are the businesses which have majority ownership by the government. Now please understand, this is the thumb rule. The majority of the shares would be owned by the government. Fine. And this is being owned by the government on behalf of the state and on behalf of the people of the state. राष्ट्र के लोगों के behalf पे, या राष्ट्र के behalf पे, it is the government which owns the shares in these public sector enterprises. Now please understand, what do we mean by majority? We basically mean 50%, more than 50%. So majority is 51%. So it could be either 51% or more than that. Or we can also say more than 50%. Fine. So there are two ways of saying this. Either you say more than 50% or you can say 51% or more or greater. So if the ownership by the government is greater than 51% or it is 51% also, then it is considered to be the majority ownership, and then this particular enterprise would be known as public sector enterprise. Right? Now please understand, it may so happen, let me give an example, it may so happen that in a particular organization 30% of the ownership is with the state government, and let's say 21% is with the central government and 49% is with a private enterprise. Right? This basically would mean that the state government and the central government combined, they own how much? 30 plus 21, which becomes 51%, which basically is a majority. So you can say that this particular business is also a public sector organization. Now please understand what I am trying to tell you. The government ownership could be held by just one government. It could only be the central government, it could be a state government, or it could be a combination of such governments. So it could be government plus state, central government plus state government. It could be two or more state governments. The idea is that more than 50% should be held by these governments, either individually, singly, or as a combination. Fine. Now, in centrally planned economies, you find a dominant role of the public sector enterprises. I hope you remember our discussion in Unit 2. The first session we talked about the centrally planned economies or the command and control economies, wherein there are so many things which the governments decide. Not only this, governments also participate in business. So such enterprises, such business enterprises which are owned by government are generally to be found in centrally planned economies. However, this does not mean that no capitalist country or a free market economy has a public sector enterprise. No, it's not like that. Even in capitalist or free market economies do you find public sector enterprise, but yes, their role is not as dominant as in the case of a centrally planned economy or a socialist economy or a command and control economy. Fine. And therefore, as a country moves from being a centrally planned economy to being more of a free market economy, as its tilt changes from being a centrally planned economy or being more tilted towards centrally planned economy to now being more tilted towards free market economy, you would find that slowly and slowly the role of the public sector enterprises would reduce in that economy, and this is one thing which has been happening in India. Right? Let me give you an example. Maruti Udyog Limited was a joint venture between government of India, and Suzuki Motor Corporations, which was a private enterprise in Japan. And it was a joint venture, and now almost after 35-36 years, you find that the government of India has divested its stake from Maruti Udyog Limited, and now the majority ownership is with Suzuki Motor Corporation. Fine. So this is an example of how a public sector enterprise may, over a period of time, change to a privately owned enterprise. And this would keep happening with those economies which are slowly moving from the left towards the right of the economic systems, which means from being more tilted towards centrally planned or command and control economy to being more tilted towards free market economy. Fine, and India is a live example. Please understand that public sector enterprises are basically present in strategically important sectors or very, very basic sectors of the economy. And what is the reason behind this? The reason is that these sectors are very, very important for the economy of a country. Not only this, they are also important for the security of a particular country. For example, if you talk about atomic energy, you know that atomic energy is used both for peaceful use. You can run an atomic nuclear plant and you can use that to produce electricity. On the other hand, it can also be used to produce bombs, nuclear bombs. Fine. So atomic energy, the production is very, very important for the country, and you would never want this technology to get into the hands of terrorists or militants. So very strategically, very important sector, and that is why you find that in India, it is still under public sector control. No private sector enterprise is allowed in atomic energy production. On the other hand, there are some basic industries. For example, you require iron and steel, very, very important for an economy, because the construction that would take place, be it the buildings, be it the bridges, be it the overbridges, be it the roads, they would require a lot of iron and steel. So many a times, these kind of sectors which are very, very essential for a particular economy, they have presence of public sector enterprises. For example, in India you find that Steel Authority of India Limited has been dealing with the production of steel. Not only this, we have got Coal India Limited, which is again a public sector organization and deals with mining of coal, which is very, very important because in India bulk of the electricity is still produced using coal through thermal power plants. So they are sectors which are very, very important for the economy, and in such sectors of the economy, the public sector enterprises would play a role. The government would be owning these enterprises, and it would ensure that they work according to the requirement of the whole economy, according to the requirement of the whole country. Fine. Now let us talk about public sector in India. There are some businesses which have been reserved exclusively for public sector. I hope you remember what you have read in Business Environment about the industrial policies. And you would recall that still in India, a few sectors have been reserved for public sector participation. No private sector enterprise is allowed to exist in these business sectors. For example, railway operations. Now again, I'm not talking about मैन्युफैक्चरिंग ऑफ रेलवे वैगन्स, डिब्बों की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग की बात हम नहीं कर रहे. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट द कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ रेलवे लाइंस और प्रोडक्शन ऑफ इंजिन्स. आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट रेलवे ऑपरेशंस. Which trains would move to which particular destinations, which all areas would we cover, which all areas would be left uncovered, where should we be having our railway stations, what should be the stoppage time. So this is what we mean by railway operations, and they are still exclusively under the public sector in India. If you talk about Indian Railways, you know that it is among the largest employer. In fact, it is the largest employer of workforce in India. And you know already that only till a few years ago, the railway budget was presented separately from the union budget, and it used to be the railway minister who used to present this budget. But now, the railway budget is part of the union budget. What I'm trying to tell you is that the kind of importance that railway operations have been given in our country since independence. Fine. And they are still under exclusive public control. There is absolute government monopoly in this particular sector. Likewise, atomic energy, I have taken up this example. Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited is basically a public sector organization which deals with atomic energy production, and it deals with operations of the nuclear power plants where atomic energy is produced. So these are the sectors which have been reserved exclusively for public sector. No private sector enterprise can enter these sectors and can perform these operations. Now let us talk about the other businesses where we have both presence of public sector as well as private sector. So there are other businesses also. We have talked about this particular category where in only the public sector presence is seen. Then there is this category where we see the presence of both public as well as private sector. So let us have a look at these examples. From banking, we have got SBI, Punjab National Bank, Union Bank of India, Bank of Baroda. You have got RRBs, regional rural banks, which are owned both by central and the state governments. So you have the various other banks. So they are all part of the public sector in India, and they are known as public sector banks. On the other hand, you have got private banks also, for example ICICI, or maybe foreign banks like Citibank. So there are foreign banks also, and there are Indian banks also, private sector, and we have got public sector banks also. The examples have been given. Then we have got in the insurance sector, you find that there are so many companies in the public sector. Life Insurance Corporation is a public sector organization and among the best performers in the country. Oriental Insurance, New India Insurance, they are non-life insurance firms. They insure things other than life. For example, they could be providing health insurance, they could be providing motor insurance, or they could be providing travel insurance. They could be providing house insurance, which means your house property would be insured against any natural calamity like flood or earthquake. So they provide non-life insurance. They sell non-life insurance, and there are 4 such PSUs in India which sell non-life insurance. That government is moving ahead with a plan wherein these 4 non-life insurers would be combined into one single entity. Then we have got the heavy machinery. Now, why is this sector very, very important for the country? Because heavy machinery is used in manufacturing, in construction, in production, and that is why heavy machinery is a very, very important sector for the Indian economy, for the economy of any country for that matter. Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, BHEL, and one of its unit is there in Haridwar as well. So this is a company which basically deals in heavy machinery and is very, very basic to the Indian economic well-being. Then we have got oil and gas production. I hope you understand that oil and gas production, because a lot of our transportation requirements are met through oil and gas, which means the petrol, diesel and the CNG or the LPGs. So it's very, very important and a necessary sector for the Indian economy, and we see that ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, basically deals with exploration, oil exploration, Then Gas Authority of India Limited is there, then Oil India Limited is there. So they basically deal with production. They are not into retailing. Please understand the difference. Production is when you are producing it, when you are digging some mine, and from that mine you are producing oil and gas. And what do we mean by non-production? As these companies are basically into production. What do we mean by non-production? We are talking about retail activities. For example, you might have seen Indian Oil Corporation petrol pumps. So they are into retailing. So they don't try to look for oil deposits, or they do not produce oil, they do not mine oil. They basically sell it into the market after refining. Fine, so there's a difference. Oil retailing, as I said, Indian Oil Corporation. Fine. Then we have got coal mining, as I said a little while ago, Coal India Limited, which mines coal and then it sells it to the other downstream industries. For example, a downstream industry could be an iron and steel manufacturing firm, where to manufacture iron and steel you need to melt iron, and to melt iron you need energy. For that energy you need coal. You are burning coal to produce that energy. So these are what we mean by downstream. This is what we mean by downstream firms. Fine. So the Coal India basically sells its coals to the downstream firms like this. Fine. I hope you understand the meaning of downstream and upstream. Let me give an example. For example, if you are running a dhaba, just to give an example, if you are running a dhaba and you are selling aloo ka parota, upstream is the farmer who is growing the potato and selling to you, and the downstream is, supposing you are selling these parotas to a school. This school further sells these parotas after charging a commission to its students. Then in your case the downstream would be this particular school. Fine, so understand and remember the difference between upstream and downstream firms. Power production. Do you understand? NTPC? National Thermal Power Corporation. So they are into producing thermal power. Thermal power is when you heat up coal to boil water, produce steam, and then use that steam to run turbines and to generate electricity. So Thermal Power Corporation is a PSU engaged in power production. Then we have got steel production, Steel Authority of India Limited, Rajkiya Ispat Nigam, Rashtriya Ispat Nigam Limited. Right? Ispat is nothing but steel. Aircraft manufacturing, we have got Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, and they are basically into manufacturing of defense aircrafts. For example, you might have heard of how they have been collaborating with so many other defense manufacturers from different countries, and they are collaborating to co-produce some defense equipments, defense aircrafts, which would not only be sold to the Indian government for its defense requirements, but would also be sold to other national governments. Then we had telecommunication. You know about BSNL and MTNL. You know about the private firms which exist in telecommunication service sector like Vodafone Idea. So BSNL is one company which is operating in Uttarakhand also, Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited. And you have got Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited. Now MTNL basically is into providing telecommunication services in Delhi. Fine. So they are public sector organizations. Then for airport operations, we have got Airport Authority of India, which is again a public sector organization. For shipbuilding, we have got the Goa Shipyard, again a PSU. Mining, we have got Hindustan Copper. So we have talked about coal mining and we understood what Coal India Limited does, but we are talking here about the copper mining, and which is done by Hindustan Copper Limited. Likewise, manufacturing of alloys. Now what do we mean by alloy? I hope you remember what you have read in science. Fine. Alloy, for example, bronze is an alloy which is made up of two different elements. When these two different elements, two different metals are brought together, bronze is produced. So that is an example of an alloy. And we have got Mishra Dhatu Nigam Limited. That is why Mishra means when you combine two dhatus, two elements, then you come up with an alloy, right? The pital which you use in your house, in your families, that is also an example of an alloy. So alloy manufacturing, we have got Mishra Dhatu Nigam Limited. For tourism also, we have Indian Railway Catering and Tourism Corporation, and ITTC as well. they are also part of the public sector here in India. In airlines, you know about Air India, which is basically a public sector organization, though the government is trying its level best to sell it to some private operator. The word which would use here would be privatize. Privatize is when the majority ownership shifts from the government to a private firm, or when a public sector organization becomes a private sector organization because of a majority of shares being held now by a private enterprise. So government is trying to privatize Air India, and Air India, till the point of time it is privatized, is a public sector organization. Now please understand, those shown in yellow, they are called as the Maharatnas, those in red are the Navratnas, and those in green are the Mini Ratnas. I hope you know what do we mean by Ratnas. Ratna, basically a gem. And the government has done what? Government has categorized all these public sector organizations into Maharatna, Navratna and Mini Ratna, depending on how well they are performing. For example, the ones which perform the best, they are then given the status of a Maharatna. Those who perform as second best, they are given the status of Navratnas, and those who have been performing well but not as good as the Maharatnas are or Navratnas are, then they will be called Mini Ratnas. Not only this, these Maharatnas or Mini Ratnas or Navratnas, then they are given some special authority. So they may take decisions which have greater implication without having to deliberate with the government, without having to discuss with the government. So in that sense, they are provided added authority. So this is why the categorization has been done by the government. Fine. So with that, I conclude the lecture today. Thank you very much for your time. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow also.